Hiya! Welcome to this, my 34th episode of VideoFuzzy. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, and in this installment, titled Everything is Fine, I unearthed some new weirdness in my music collection. Arrested Development makes its debut in my catalog listing, welcome. A few movies in my current collection alternately raise my interest and eyebrows, and with the third season premiere looming, I am up to speed on season 1 of The Good Place. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
Well, the issues I was having with my music collection just seem to keep getting weirder. I got my dead laptop rehabbed this past week. It only needed a new fan, so that was a blissfully affordable repair, and now I've got a backup, so yay! Well, I pulled up the songs that wouldn't play in iTunes on my PC because of authorization issues. Previously on VideoFuzzy, I discovered a slug of nearly 200 songs I bought using an iTunes account whose authorization did not follow me from one computer to the next. I pulled the songs that wouldn't play on my PC into a playlist for further processing, and, well, this is weird. They were not all there. I thought I transferred my entire music collection from one computer to the next as I got them, but along with the cataloging weirdnesses that stripped music files of ID3 tags and landed some 150 songs into an unknown artist folder, you'll remember previously on VideoFuzzy, there's a bunch of songs I've got named Track 1, Track 2, etc. in an unknown artist folder. Some transferred with that information from the one iTunes collection into my PC, which oddly enough, in the transfer process, seems to have restored at least some of them, while still not transferring the renewed authorization I managed to achieve on my laptop. So I made a second, much shorter list of the songs that did not show up that I'll pull copies from my PC to my laptop so as to listen to them on a machine that's able to play them, and then bring the whole collection into my PC in a format that they'll play. Again, any watchdogs, full assurances I bought all these songs. Apple for sure got my money for all of them. I just need to get them all playable again. These days, the iffiest thing I do is pull sound files from my DVD collection into my MP3 player, but that's just personal use of broadcast media, not for public consumption, not featured in any publicly accessible format. No one from ASCAP or RIAA needs to be. I'm not even using any of it on this or any podcast. So long as they still sell blank cassettes, do they? Does anyone? Amazon's got blank Maxell cassettes for sale, and Best Buy sells a CD/cassette recorder for less than $30 and a cassette to MP3 dubber for $20. So as long as you can hear a song on your radio and make it an MP3, I don't feel even a little bit bad about listening to music from my TV on an MP3 player. It's basically a mixtape. Before I get into this, I'm here at the City Brew in Bismarck again writing this up, and I just heard Edie Brickell sing Tomorrow Comes from her 1994 release Picture Perfect Morning, and that one is definitely going into the buy pile. Such a great vibe. Love hanging here. Cheers all.
Friday Night Feature.
Anyway, I was so thrilled to see an episode of Arrested Development show up in my collection, not least of which because it looked like I would only be able to talk about Battlestar Galactica again, which, do not get me wrong, I love the show and there are so many things to talk about in a show that deeply written, not least of which I'd forgotten back on Cylon-occupied Caprica. Caprica 6 had a version of where I am in the story right now, presidential candidate Baltergaius, only she could see messing with her head, so that was fun. But along with a classic episode of The Simpsons where Homer hijacks a church service, that was wild. Reverend Lovejoy got so involved with a model train wreck, which somehow happens on a Sunday morning during Advent, which is pretty much sweeps week for the church, but never mind, it wasn't supposed to be Homer. Ned Flanders was ready with a collar and many pages of sermon he'd practiced in the shower, but darn the luck, he got a paper cut and passed out from the sight of blood. So, of all people, Homer took the pulpit and regaled the congregation with a somehow even less likely version of events, which, among other things, the three wise men included Professor Frink with myrrh, which I am regifting because who needs myrrh? A holy duck with a decoy halo, and Homer as Joseph. But I wanted to watch the Orange Bowl. There's a bowl with oranges sitting there. It's a thing. Also, the episode of The Family Guy where Stewie gets hit with a bad baptism and Peter starts the first church of Fonzie, and a South Park whose take on child abduction somehow involved the Shitty guy and Mongolians, but of much greater interest in terms of this collection was on disc 537. This is Arrested Development, Season 3, Episode 8, not only the first episode I've encountered since I started this podcast, this is the first appearance of this show in my catalog. Welcome, Bluths. The BBC quoted Michael Cera, hapless teen supporting character George Michael Bluth, saying, "Arrested Development spent its life on the verge of being cancelled." I loved the show from the pilot episode because I love Jason Bateman, always have, and I loved the delightfully quirky spontaneity of the show, almost Family Guy style cutaways where any offhand mention of some bizarre plot development becomes found footage exploited by a team of mockumentarians narrated by Ron Howard. I believe him. The show was a not-animated comedy on Fox without a laugh track, which developed a complicated history among a sprawling cast of supporting characters, and I already mentioned the killing blow, that is, I loved it, which, on top of everything else, got it chased around the grid and preempted occasionally by roving bands at commercials. This episode, which appeared in the third season of the increasingly unlikely continuing saga of the Bluth family, highlights the competitive streak Jeffrey Tambor as Bluth patriarch George Sr. engendered in his sons Michael and Job, played by Bateman, I'm Bateman, and Will Arnett. I'm Batman. It's a thing, he voices the Lego Batman. Anyway, this production introduces us to the, well, it was big in Latin America, I guess, as Luchas de Muchachos, video series Boy Fights, with cameos of Baby Buster in such segments as Too Old to Breastfeed, and 15-Year-Old Wets the Bed, and I Don't Want to Be in This Tape. After Michael has to kick Job out of a board meeting after he presents George Sr.'s ill-conceived, not to mention illegal, plot to design timeshares in Colombia, he grouses to Portia de Rossi as twin sister Lindsay Funke about Job and his recently long-lost son Steve Holt stealing his thunder, but she can't concentrate because she's too busy trying to unduly influence Scott Baio as her divorce lawyer Bob Blah Blah. Yes, that Bob Blah Blah of the Bob Blah Blah Law blog, also sought for undue influence by David Cross as Tobias Funke, so Michael confronts Job about perhaps finding something else to do to thwart their fathers constantly getting them at each other's throats in his efforts to hone their competitive natures. Well, Job decides that he and his son will open a frozen banana stand across from the one Michael is running with his son, George Michael, which leads to a musical montage of outrageous stunts involving banana cosplays, at least strippers, jetpacks, calls for interventions from the health department, and direct hand-to-hand combat, or, well, fisticuffs, or, well, slap fights that end up partially on the ground, until Michael learns that George Sr. went ahead with the Colombian deal, laundered the money through Job's banana stand, and got them fighting again so that Michael would be too distracted to notice. To teach him a lesson, they pull in Steve Ryan as J. Walter Weatherman, whom their father had employed in one-armed scare tactics, which goes not well, especially when Tony Hale is their younger brother, the also one-armed, well, one-handed Buster Bluth, recognized as Baby Buster from Luchas de Muchachos by the Colombian paint crew hired by Jessica Walter as Lucille Bluth to paint the apartment while she got a facelift. Michael and Job have the paint crew pose as kidnappers and stage a kidnapping to a Central American jungle, a different room in the apartment with a hastily constructed tiki bar, and George grabs one of their rifles and fires on, oh my god, his arm flew right off. Oh wait, that's J. Walter Weatherman, and their father had actually turned the tables on them. Or so it seems, until Job slap fights Michael right off a balcony. Oh, what a scare. Oh, they got them. But then Baby Buster gets shot, and his good hand flies right off. Oh, wait, that's also a lesson: don't use amputees to teach life lessons. The one who really exploits body modification is maybe Funke, posing as a movie director whose horror film test audiences are laughing off the screen. Her producer gives her a week to fix it, and when she sees the results of Lucille's facelift, she knows that she has her monster. Gengi, she calls her grandmother Gengi's mutilated face, terrifies audiences, and is greenlit as the monster for both this movie and its sequel, Gengi 2. As I was putting this reaction together, I realized I hadn't actually completed my cataloging of Disc 537, so this past Sunday I tracked through the rest of it and found 3 more episodes, one from Season 2 featuring Julia Louis-Dreyfus as a lawyer who was representing the surrogate mother for a gay couple whose child she was meant to be carrying, but still managed to convince Michael the child that she was in fact not carrying was his, and a couple from Season 3, one where they were pulling out all the stops with guest stars and 3D imagery and no fewer than 5 versions of Andy Richter, and one with the visit from Martin Short as Uncle Jack. Absolutely friggin' hilarious. I love that man so much. National treasure. He's from Canada. I didn't say which nation. The show disappeared after 3 seasons of similarly complicated comedy, only to return in 2013 for 2 seasons I've barely even heard of on Netflix, the most recent of which premiered in May of this year, and nope, streaming service, I'm entirely in the dark as to what they've been up to. The first 3 seasons, which ran from 2003 to 2006, tracked international intrigue with real estate development scandals in Iraq while George W. Bush was waging a war there. I can't imagine what kind of topical, real estate-based comic chicanery would be possible with our current political climate. I guess I'll just have to subscribe, or more probably add the disc sets to my collection once Season 5 wraps. To be honest, the reviews I've heard have been mixed, but I did love this show and the creative team behind it, so I'll probably give it a shot.
Diving into the classic collection.
I mentioned The Simpsons, Family Guy, and oh yeah, there was a significant episode of Dexter in there as well, where we learned the identity of the ice truck killer. He's dating Dexter's sister. What a twist! Mostly what I've been watching is, as I mentioned up there, several more episodes of Battlestar Galactica. In a scene at the top of the 2nd season entry Sacrifice, a conspiracy theorist is constructing and reorganizing a beautiful Mind-style process board with clippings featuring photos of known Cylons, and I was a little confused because surely paper is a scarce commodity. I mean, no one had even heard of skin jobs, humanoid Cylons, until after the fall of Caprica, and I was certain this concept was revealed with the suicide bombing and subsequent paranoia induced by Number 5, Aaron Dorrell, played by Matthew Bennett in Season 1, Episode 6, titled Litmus. So there just wouldn't be a lot of printed material devoted to who's a Cylon. It wouldn't be newsprint or magazines. This isn't really the point, I know, but as a guy who spent most of his professional life in print journalism, I notice its presence and consider how those words came to be on that paper. Someone researched it, conducted whatever interviews and reporting, and banged it out on, this I loved. I loved this character. That was Dana freaking Delany, a Cylon conspiracy theorist, Sesha. That is Sesha, the weaver of Cylon conspiracy theories, not Sesha, a Cylon who theorizes conspiracies. Sorry for any confusion. Anyway, Dana freaking Delany as Sesha, whose husband was killed in a Cylon attack, bangs out her Cylon conspiracies on this delightfully steampunky computer keyboard, and possibly prints them out herself from what seemed to be culled in scrapbooky material, just noting the style and formatting, and again the scarcity of paper. But hey, she does carry out her occupation with a few fellow co-conspirators, so perhaps she is indeed printing out her anti-Cylon conspiracies and circulating them to her fan base. Either way, it was an eye-catching way to start an episode. I'd have liked to spend a little more time with that one, as well as downloaded the Cylon-centric episode where we learn about Cylon society and life on Cylon-occupied Caprica, but I'm sure I'll have a chance to stop back and revisit that once I get done with the whole cataloging portion of this project.
Current collection.
A couple of weeks ago, I committed a few not great movies to my direct-DVD archive, including the unfortunately raunchy Seth Rogen Project FX aired called Sausage Party from 2016, and then the Real FX Creative Studios project The Book of Life from 2014, which suffered from comparisons with Pixar's Coco. The movie was fine, it just took a while to get its feet under it, but if you had to pick one Day of the Dead animated feature, hands down Coco is the one to see. I also watched the raw Julian Assange piece, The Fifth Estate, from 2013, featuring Benedict Cumberbatch as the affable international mop-top tech wizard, which was probably a valid take on the earliest underpinnings of Wikileaks, but if you're asking me where exactly they'd installed the safeguards against the construction and distribution of false evidence in this insufficiently prescient movie, they were probably in Aaron Sorkin's version, which would probably have actually been able to see the future. I've always suspected Mr. Sorkin can see in 5 dimensions, but since all we had was this one, it was a little more celebratory, a little more promoty, certainly than overseas military operations would have appreciated, and as it alleged the diplomatic machinations behind the scenes, a little bit more ha-ha than I think most people were feeling. The fact is, things happen all the time that we never hear about, and generally doesn't affect our ability to democracy. Most of us can really only get our heads around the broad strokes, don't have time to read a million policy papers, and I've never seen anything Chelsea, well, at that point Bradley Manning released, but it didn't exactly make me feel safer. I have a stronger reaction to the Podesta email dump, but the reality of email is that it's a communication. It's like if Herbert Hoover had a whole bunch of letters that were discovered in a box in his room and suddenly were the entire front page of the New York Times. Yeah, there'd be information in that issue I would probably have found interesting, some probably shocking, some probably that would change my mind about this or that. But in their private communications, when they are puzzling out policy and negotiating strategy, our leaders sometimes take hard lines or soft lines that present points to begin or continue negotiations, for example, that no one on either side would anticipate in the final agreement. So yeah, watching the sausage get made, as the phrasing goes, isn't always revelatory or reflective of the leader's true nature. Bargaining, negotiating strategies, discussions, feelers, suggested means to proceed. These communications are all kept private because they're not yet public. They are kept private for years after the events they brought about are deflected from happening for reasons, and to varying degrees were never true, were never really what was going on, just one person's take or presentation or thoughts on things. And for real, people, if an email is sent, that means that somebody has it. I mean, honestly, how has this never been part of these discussions? This data dumping ground, which Assange famously wanted to maintain was never read nor tampered with before release to the public, was also then never vetted nor verified, and honestly, what do any of us have to compare it against? Thus, an engine intended to create an international safe space for whistleblowers, a service it demonstrably provided in several instances, could be manipulated by cynical partisans and forwarding their interest in distorting public discourse. Was it? How could we know? If my reaction to the Fifth Estate is less enthusiastic than this movie is for its subject, it's probably because it has been steeped in 5 additional years of history, as well as a few more election cycles. In other viewing, Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency drew to a strong conclusion, setting up a 3rd season brilliantly, which, as it turns out, it was unable to explore, but no matter. Better a production be strong and short than long and sputtery. I'd say Preacher's 3rd season drew to a strong conclusion as well, and whether it returns for a 4th or not, I'd say they closed out the season 3 beautifully, with some fantastic twists, reveals, and callbacks that are the hallmark of superior writing. Jesse taking on Grandma Marie Langell mirrored the cowboy taking on Satan and Cassidy taking on Icarius. It all came together beautifully. As a personal aside, I was happy to see FX decided to rerun the 7th season of American Horror Story Cult in the run-up to the 8th season, Apocalypse, premiering this week. I was able to nab that episode of Drink the Kool-Aid that I mentioned in episode 22 that I damaged in the recording, that I'd somehow hit pause when I meant to hit record and vice versa, so the second half of that episode was in my collection as the garbled fast-forwarding of commercials. I archived a clean version of that rather intriguing installment, which included, cut into archival footage, Evan Peters presenting various cult leaders, including David Koresh, Marshall Applewhite, and Jim Jones. Wild. I'm nearly caught up on my DVR backlog of Supernatural, which has been pretty cool. I enjoyed Funeralia and Beat the Devil, in which Lucifer, returned from having taken over heaven, had been drugged and overpowered, mystically sapped of his grace to keep a portal to a dark dimension open so our heroes could retrieve their mother, Mary Winchester, and Jack. But all he needed, apparently, was for someone to mention his son is over there, and he hopped right back across from, hey, refresh my memory, wasn't he trapped on that side when all of this started? And despite losing all that grace, he's all revved up and ready to go. I'm confused, but hey, as of where I got to this past week, those Winchester boys have reunited with their mom and Jack, and Lucifer bringing up the rear, so I'm basically on the home stretch for this season. Oh, and in my nerd shows, I enjoyed the Science Channel presentation of the Lost Gospels, which were not especially informative beyond narration listing their existence, and some of the early church activity which elevated the four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as standard-bearers and exiled others, the Gospels of Peter, Thomas, Philip, Mary Magdalene, and even Judas, to Mulder, sailed up in caves near the Dead Sea and later discovered, some in the 1800s, some as recently as 10-12 years ago. It's probable that there are copies in monasteries throughout Christendom, but Mother Church isn't all that big on unorthodox views, and if they are there, they'll probably stay hidden, at least until Chelsea Manning takes orders, joins a convent, and figures out how to upload heretical documents to Wikileaks. What was interesting, well, interesting to me anyway, about watching the episode of how the universe works on how sunlight is produced and then makes its way to Earth was its coincidence with a podcast I've been listening to for a few weeks now called In Our Time Science, produced by BBC Radio 4. A recent episode covered the same topic. Host Melvin Bragg invites scientists and historians in to discuss various topics, and one I listened to just this past week discussed the internal structure of the sun and the production of sunlight, which kind of also coincides a little bit with the book I'm currently reading on my lunch break by physicist John Butterworth called The Most Wanted Particle, released in 2015, which talks about the discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN, but more to the point is providing a lot of excellent background on particle interactions such as occur at the core of stars, and how atoms in a plasma environment can overcome electromagnetic repulsion such that 4 hydrogen atoms can become the 2 protons and 2 neutrons and 2 electrons in a helium atom. And honestly, I'm just experiencing all this information at roughly the same time from different sources and enjoying what everyone's bringing to the discussion, while I'm just, for my own personal information, trying to pry open and peer through whatever windows we've managed to open on the nature of reality. Someone in one of the other In Our Time Science discussions on the structure of cells made reference to mitochondria, and quite most of our some 37 trillion cells have structures turning 1,000,000 times a second, which, even if that's a gross exaggeration, I mean, honestly, anything happening even 100 times a second is a fairly outrageous amount of activity to be going on trillions of places throughout my body. I'm a little worn out just thinking about it, but hey, just glimpses into what we know, what can be known. I'm interested. What can I say?
What I've been watching.
And now, for this installment of What I've Been Watching, I mentioned a series that has been produced, written, and performed by a troupe of actors specifically for me to enjoy. The Good Place has run for 2 seasons on NBC. Its 3rd season is about to premiere, and where the heck have I been in all of this? Well, I'd mentioned I'd planned to take some time over Labor Day weekend and binge-watch seasons 1 and 2 on demand, but when I pulled up that series on my cable listing, it only listed season 2 episodes. Cool. So I ordered season 1, and it arrived in plenty of time for me to chug it down over Labor Day Friday night and Saturday. Blew my mind. I am not used to laughing out loud at sitcoms, an experience I could revisit rewatching some Arrested Development this past weekend, but so many elements in this show went exactly there, not least of which, whenever the helpful servant android Janet would make a sudden appearance, and oh wow, when she'd been rebooted and it was re-accessing her memory files, and unfortunately all she could bring anyone for a while were cacti. And then, when we feared the worst, that she could re-access her memory files on Eleanor Shellstrop, played by Kristen Bell, at a critically damaging moment, Ted Danson as Architect Michael whips open the file she hands him to find a picture of cactuses. I'm so sorry, but if you're exactly me, you see a scene like that and the combination of surprise and relief has you laughing out loud. Eleanor died, and her soul has landed up in The Good Place, a construct put together by Michael to be the perfect community for everyone who lives there, because everyone there lived such exemplary lives while on Earth. Except Eleanor knows that she did not, and discovers that she is there in place of this noble saint of a do-gooder who solved hunger and eradicated disease, who had the same name as her, and through one of those cosmic mix-ups ended up in the bad place. Well, she's not in any hurry to resolve the mix-up and end up in the bad place herself. Her soulmate, everyone there's got one, is ethicist Chidi Anaganye, played by William Jackson Harper, who battles an ethical nightmare of stability for everyone in the good place. There's disasters through some kind of imbalance pretty much traceable exactly to Eleanor, and helping her become a better person so that she can deserve to keep living there. Her next-door neighbor,
Hani Al-Jamil, played by Jamila Jamil,
is certain that she belongs there because she spent her whole life working very hard to please her parents, but her chatty and effusive nature is blunted by her soulmate, a Buddhist monk who took a vow of silence. However, as it turns out, he is not the Buddhist monk that he pretends, so now Eleanor is aware that there's two people there who shouldn't be, and no wonder everything is going directly to... well... Funny you should mention that, but I wanted to pause for a moment to discuss the wonderful introduction to this series, which was part of what drew me in. Architect Michael gathers the 100-plus souls in the community to watch an orientation video in which he outlines why they are there. Everyone's actions while alive, he said, send positive and negative energy into the universe, energy which is quantified and used in determining where one ends up in the afterlife. Several examples were provided as sources of positive and negative energy, which I couldn't quite catch all of them, and some numbers continued to cycle up as the screen cut to the next scene, but simply as a public service, here are some examples of quantized sources of negative and positive energy as listed in the orientation video presented in The Good Place. They include... on the positive side, remembering sister's birthday, plus 15.02. Save a child from drowning, plus 1,202.33. Remain loyal to the Cleveland Browns, plus 53.83. Hug a sad friend, plus 4.98. Eat a sandwich, plus 1.04. Scratch elbow, plus 2.00. Pet a lamb, plus 0.89. Plant a baobab tree in Madagascar, plus 9.40. Politely tolerate a stranger recounting a New Yorker article at a cocktail party, plus 12.23. End slavery, plus 814,292.21. Fix a broken tricycle for a child who loves tricycles, plus 6.58. Fix a broken tricycle for a child who is indifferent to tricycles, plus 0.04. Step carefully over a flower bed, plus 2.09. Purify the water source for a village population greater than 250, plus 292.5. Maintain composure in a line at a water park in Houston, plus 60.82. And on the negative side, be commissioner for a professional American Football League, minus 824.55. Disturb a coral reef with flippers, minus 53.83. Stiff a waitress, minus 6.83. Use Facebook as a verb, minus 5.55. Buy a trashy magazine, minus 0.75. Poison a river, minus 4,010.55. Harassment, sexual, minus 731.20. Use the term bro code, minus 8.20. Rev a motorcycle, minus 72.06. Commit genocide, minus 433,547.22. Root for the New York Yankees, minus 99.60. Ruin an opera with boorish behavior, minus 90.90. Steal the copper wiring from a decommissioned military base, minus 16.00. Tell a woman to smile, minus 53.83. Fail to disclose camel illness while selling a camel, minus 22.22. Blow nose by pressing nostril down and exhaling, minus 1.44. Overstate personal connection to tragedy has nothing to do with you, minus 40.97. I have to believe that there are so many others, but it's just the first instance of such a screen in Season 1. I got my handy-dandy frame advance out and transcribed them, but there's a second one later that I want to revisit at some point that listed all the bad things Eleanor ever did. It was part of the trial that could send her to the bad place, but as Eleanor herself realized in the first season finale, they weren't going to be sending her anywhere, because she was already in the bad place. Yep, she came to the realization that their entire time in this little community filled with frozen yogurt shops and mild irritations she'd before attributed to not being the Eleanor her quaint little clown-filled home had been created for, or the super ethical soulmate she'd been assigned. She'd basically been tormented her entire time there with the realization she did not belong and frantic efforts to stay. Her soulmate, Chidi, had been tormented his entire time there, distracted from his life's work, and forced to throw it in the trash to focus on this, wow, so not ethical, needy blonde lady he had nothing in common with. The neighbor was tormented by everything she tried to do would simply backfire, and just as in life, nothing she managed to do was ever good enough, and her faux Buddhist monk, a drug-dealing DJ who wanted nothing more than to hang with his buds and eat junk food, really had no way of doing that in his situation. Michael grins and gives an evil laugh. Ha 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 ha! Curses, she'd figured it out. Oh well, next time they just make it a little harder. Wait, what? Next time? Yep. They erased their memories. Apart from a cryptic little clue that Eleanor left herself, Season 2 opens up tabula rasa. Except, and this is what I'm mostly looking forward to, now we are all in on it. So all the stuff that looked like Michael just wasn't very good at crafting a heaven, in fact, was his means of tormenting them. Oh yeah, this is like an entire hell for just 4 people. Everyone else was just demons. So, diving right into the next season, well, Darn the luck. When I pulled up The Good Place on demand, I discovered that Season 2 had also vanished. Michael? No worries, my DVD set arrived this past weekend, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how they play this out, particularly with Season 3 premiering end of this month. This fall, for the first time with both Supernatural and The Good Place, I'll be watching them play out in real time. Awesome! And with that, thank you all so much for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com, past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and iTunes at VideoFuzzy.libsyn.com, or search for me on Spotify under Terry J. Aman. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook, or you can follow me at TJVideoFuzzy on Twitter. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.